تولدوس نوح איש צדיק תמים היה בדורותיו אלוהים יסחלך נוח ויולד נוח 3 בנים שם חם ויפס.
Today's weekly parasha is called Noach. This word we understand, it's the name of the famous biblical hero. The biblical hero which exists in other religions too, because the flood stories appear in many poems and myths which exist across the ancient Middle East. The most ancient flood story which we can find is Sumerian flood story. And it also exists in Babylon, very famous part of the very well-known epic of Gilgamesh. Based on this fact, we can conclude that the flood was very well-known fact. Information about the flood exists in many sources, and scholars today have no doubts that something catastrophic happened on earth. So many civilizations know about it. Of course, many liberal scholars today believe that the biblical flood story and Mesopotamian flood story have the same root. However, there is a huge difference. The flood story described, particularly in the Epic of Gilgamesh, is notorious for its depiction of God Enlil, who was disturbed from his sleep by the humans who were too noisy, and that's why he decides to destroy them. Utunapishtim, who is the Babylonian analog of Noah, biblical Noah, receives a secret insider information from one of the other gods called Enki and starts to act. It is interesting how Sumerian flood story ends. When God Enlil discovers Utunapishtim, who escapes the destruction of the flood, he decides to punish him with ability to live forever. Isn't it the interesting picture? The immortality and eternal life in the Babylonian Sumerian philosophy is considered as a punishment. The story of biblical flood described in the Torah is different. And it has its explanation in a text of Genesis 6, which is the part of the previous parasha, but is very important to establish the context of what we're talking about. It says here in verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also in afterwards, when the sons of God have come into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them, whose were mighty men, who were of old men of renown. This translation which I'm using here, New Revised Standard, is very much aware of the fact that the word Nephilim is a very rare word. The Septuagint has translated this word as gigantos, the giants, and this is not the main thrust of this text. The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew root nafal, which means to fall. The fallen people became a result of marriage between the sons of God and the daughters of man. We know about the sons of God a little bit. The sons of God were those who were born in chapter 5 after the death of Abel. Seth, the son of Adam, became the first who called upon the name of God. This is why the problem started. The wrong marriages between those who followed God and those who remained in the human world became lethal for the humanity and caused the situation which is described in verse 6. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. That translation isn't the best. The word which is used there, the Hebrew word naham, is a very picturesque. Naham. It's a very rare word which appears in the scripture, but it comes from the sound hum. That sound we make when we have a strong chest pain and our heart aches, and we try to relieve the pain by exhaling. And that's why we make the word hum. And the Lord here looked upon the earth, and that's what he can produce, the sigh of hum. He sees the situation. He sees the problem. He sees that everything is evil, as it says in verse 5. Every intent of the thoughts of the heart of the human was only evil continually. And that's why God exhales and makes a decision to destroy the earth. However, that's how the parasha starts. But the Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Was Noah something different than other human being? Yes, the text says that he was very honest, very decent man, and the earth was corrupted. But there was more into the righteousness of Noah, which God used in this case. Because Noah was given a command to build a boat, an ark. Actually, that was very interesting too, because the word which is used there is not used for any definition of any floatable, controllable boat. The ark was made to house, but it wasn't made to be controlled. There was no steering control and no rudder and no engine. And it was made to float. The other phenomena of the ark was its size. If you take the measurement of that floating box, you'll discover that its measurement coincided with the measurement of the Titanic. And if you think of the Titanic, this was a huge vessel. If you take out the engine, the fuel storage, and all other service compartments, you will find sufficient place to house enough animals. The vessel itself had over 3,000 passengers that lived in different classes of comfort. There were part that lived in a 4 beds compartments, the lowest class, which were down below the deck. There was a part that lived in luxury suites of 2 and 3 and even 4 rooms, plus there were restaurants and ballrooms. If you clear out that part, you will discover that there is enough space on this ship to house over 20,000 passengers, besides the food and besides the animal. The scholars, creationists, have come to conclusion for a long time that if we count the rate of multiplication and the length of life which existed in the times of the patriarchs, started with Adam, the population of the earth under these conditions did not exceed 20,000 people. This ark was truly a place to house entire world population. Of course, under condition that the population would accept the idea that there will be a flood upon the earth and would walk into that ark and just sit there tightly. This didn't happen, and the earth was destroyed. That's why only 8 people remained as the sole survivors. There is a big debate about this flood story and its truthfulness. However, differently from the Genesis chapter 1, where creation itself is described in such terms that cannot be scientifically verified, the flood story is very much verifiable. First of all, everybody, including most of the geologists, see the facts of the actions of water upon the surface of earth. But one thing is to see the facts and to take a measurement. Another thing is to give interpretation. Modern geology and geological history of the earth, dictated by the Darwinist philosophy, does not accept the biblical story very easily. That's why another explanation is given about the mysterious glacier that somehow descended upon the earth. But the Bible is speaking differently about this. In verse 1 of chapter 8, it says how God took care of the excess water, which was a result of a flood. It says that God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. Today, we see the consequences of that wind passing over the water very, very much. The recent Hurricane Ike was tracked when it started as a tropical depression on the east coast of Africa, and somehow that tropical depression has made its way into the Gulf of Mexico. This is how the jet stream works along the equator, moving the air constantly in one direction from east to west. And because of that, Caribbean islands constantly experience the activity of the trade winds. The Bible is very clear about the climate change too, which happened. A little poem recorded in verse 22 of chapter 8 makes a very interesting observation. While the earth remains seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter shall not cease. The change of seasons on this earth occur due to the precision of the axle of the earth's rotation. That axle moves at the angle and making the position of different parts of the earth closer or further from the sun. That's what happened at the end of the flood. And the scholars who study the Earth's geological history acknowledge the fact that the axle of the Earth's rotation was in a different position before. They noticed that. What happens? The wind starts blowing and the globe becomes wobbly. The forces of inertia take care of the water. The waters which are above the equator on the north start moving northward, while the waters which are below the equator start moving southward. And of course, the change of the season allows the temperature on the poles to become low, and the water freezes in Arctic and Antarctic regions. This is why today, if Antarctic decides to melt, everybody knows that the water will cover Everest Mountain very well. The facts are there. The interpretation is to the human. This is the story of the flood. Very verifiable in the same way as the story of the Tower of Babel, which is the part of that parasha too. The story of changing the language on earth is also scientifically verifiable. And interestingly enough, that theory was of the languages, the classification of the languages which exist on the earth was created by the Soviet communist scholar Igor Diakonov, who actually was amazed to see how different families of the world languages have nothing in common, which of course was a big problem for the Darwinistic theory, which believed that the humans appeared somewhere in the Kenyan plateau and spread gradually from one source over the earth and developed their language gradually from one source too. Diakonov believes this is not the case. This is the weekly parsha. This is the overview of the Torah portion. But again, as always, we need to look at how the rabbis connect this Torah portion with the portion from the prophets. And it always amazes me about the wisdom of the rabbis that needed to find the prophetic portion to match the Torah portion. At first, it's startling. Isaiah 54 says, "Shout for joy, O barren one. You who have borne no child, break forth into joyful shouting and cry aloud. You who have not travailed, for the sons of the desolate will be more numerous." This poem, which Isaiah gives us in the beginning of the third part of his book, describes the joy of Israel as the barren woman who is actually a widowed or divorced. Why? What's this all about? What's the barren, divorced woman have to do with the story of the flood or the story of the Tower of Babel? Well, the key part and the key answer is in the verse 5, where we also see the creation motive. Verse 5 says, "For your husband is your maker, whose name is the Lord of hosts, and you and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel, who is called the God of all the earth." your husband. This euphemism is very widespread. Israel is often called the wife of God, and when Israel goes into idolatry, it is called the adulterous wife. Well, first of all, its explanation of such a euphemism is linguistic. The word Israel in Hebrew language is in feminine. Hebrew language has two genders, two grammatical genders. And the Israel is feminine there. That's why Jerusalem is feminine too, and that's why we have daughters of Jerusalem. They're not sexist. It's just a grammar. But there is a little more than a grammar here. A little more than that. Because there is something in this relation between God and Israel which does resemble the marriage. Exodus chapter 19 calls Israel the holy people. The word holy, kadosh, is the important word. Kadosh is used as the root of the word which is applied in the case of betrothal. Betrothal in Hebrew is called kiddushin. Kiddushin, betrothal. Why? Well, if you look at the Hebrew wedding, at the Jewish wedding, it's different from the Christian one. The Jewish wedding occurs under the canopy, which is called huppah, under which, under cover, the bride sits. And the groom comes toward the bride and gives her a piece of gold, today it's a golden ring, and says, "Behold, now you become holy to me, according to the law of Israel and the Torah." What does it mean? The rabbis understand it only one way. By accepting that piece of gold, a young lady becomes forbidden for every man except for the one from whom she receives that piece of gold. That's how the woman enters into the marriage covenant. This is why God is the husband. It's the idea of covenant which takes place in the book of Genesis chapter 9. Verse 9 says, "And behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you." It's very interesting that the establishment of the covenant occurs after the fact that Noah exits the ark and brings the sacrifices. God did not promise and did not enter into the covenant with Noah while Noah was building the ark. He promised to enter, but the covenant was not made until Noah comes out. And when Noah comes out, he offers the sacrifices, and then God smells the sweet odor of the sacrifice, and then and only then God makes the long speech promising never destroy the earth by flood again, and announcing the consummation of the covenant. Interestingly enough, that covenant here is established. It is not negotiated. Covenant is established because Noah, as all human beings, have only one choice: either to take it or not to take it. In the same way as a bride has a choice to take the piece of gold. All other arrangements are negotiated between the bride and the father, between the bridegroom and the father of the bride. And the marriage contract is drawn. But the lady has only a choice, either to accept it or to reject it. And God acts in the same manner. This is how humanity, people of God, enter into the marriage with God. And that's what the part of the New Testament which we suggest to read for this week talks about. Revelation 19 verse 7 says, "Let us rejoice and be glad, give the glory to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made himself ready." In the very beginning, at the salvation from the flood, humanity entered into the covenant, and God was faithful in his obligation. At the end of the earth, the great promise is that God will keep his covenant for everyone who takes it from God's hand.